Hey everybody, this is Garrett with Earth and Time, and today I want to check out this garden here. It says there's a prehistoric garden at one of my favorite arboretums in the greater Houston area, a place called Mercer Arboretum, which is a free garden you can come to, and what I think is one of the most picturesque places here within the greater Houston area. So come join me today to check out this prehistoric garden here at Mercer Arboretum in Houston, Texas. Let's get to it. I've worked my way to the entrance to the prehistoric garden, and as I pan over to my right, we can take a look at this sculpture that they put in place here. So these are not real rocks, but what's cool about it is they tried to copy some stratigraphy here, and you can see the layers that they put in place, and makes this really nice walkway into this prehistoric garden. Something else to mention with this prehistoric garden, again, depends on where you really talk about prehistory. Prehistory could be up to 1,000 years ago, right? Or 10,000 years ago. Sometimes the end of the last glacial maxima, or what people call the last ice age, is what people think about when they think about prehistoric. But we're going to be talking about things much, much older here. This used to be called the Jurassic Gardens or the Dinosaur Gardens back when I first moved here to the Houston area. So I think a lot of the plants that they have here, they're referring to more from the time of the dinosaurs. At least that's what I remember. So anybody who knows a little bit more can fact check me down below. So here's a first example of a prehistoric plant here, the cycad, and we can take a look at what some of the fossils of these look like as well now. Let's go ahead and work our way actually into the garden now, and I love this entryway that makes it feel like you're stepping into another time. Now, as I step through, I'm going to pan around. What I'm not sure if all of these are prehistoric plants. Now, when I look at stuff like what this material is, which by the way, they don't have a sign for, or if I pan up looking through all of these, this looks very much like what I would expect to see from a prehistoric world. I just wish they had signs on all of them so I could look them up and see what kind of fossil remains are out there in literature as well. So that's one of the fun things, and why I wanted to share this episode with you is, one, Mercer is a free place for folks to come to who live in the Houston area, or if you're vacationing here, and it's a great garden. I'll show you some of the other highlights after we finish this portion of the video looking at these prehistoric plants. But two, I wanted to show you some of the fossils from each of these things, like the cycad we already saw. However, if they don't have signs, I am not a botanist, I am not a biologist. So we'll try our best to figure out which of these match up with some fossils, or see if I can do a little bit more research in between. So as we pan around, we can see these cliff cycads, and a little bit about the history of cycads, like the one we saw before. But they're a group of plants that have been around for over 300 million years, and they've been found on every continent except for Antarctica. And they actually think cycads were an important food source for dinosaurs. I read a little bit more about these cycads, and apparently they're endangered because people poach them, or their habitats are being destroyed. Of the 300 species or so that live today, about 50% of them are threatened. So as we continue walking around, it looks like they have some other, there's another cliff cycad. There's some flowering plants here as well, but again, I think the flowering plants are all going to be, they'd be very latest time of the dinosaurs, if at all, and I'm not sure when lilies first arrived on the scene. There are palms here. Now, I know from the work I've done that I've actually found palm fronds, and that's what you call these big leafy structures down below here. I've actually found fossil record of those that are Cretaceous or late Cretaceous in age, basically the end of the time of the dinosaurs. So palms were probably around from about 90 million years or so going forward. Remember, dinosaurs went extinct about 65 million years ago. So these palms that we see definitely could be part of a prehistoric garden during the end times of dinosaurs. So as a review, the dinosaurs really lived during what was known as the Mesozoic, and we split the Mesozoic into three different groups. So we have the Triassic, which is the earliest time. We have the Jurassic, which is the mid-time, probably most famous because of things like Jurassic Park. And then we have the Cretaceous, which is when the dinosaurs eventually go extinct before going into the Cenozoic. At the base of this palm, They actually have one of the oldest families of plants recorded, and those are ferns. The earliest fossil ferns are somewhere around almost 400 million years old. So you can really think of kind of right around the time of the Devonian. And what's important about that is that makes them some of the earliest known plants that were on land. And of course, ferns are still around today. And that means ferns were really resilient. They've gone through a lot of different mass extinctions, which mass extinctions not only wiped out animal life, but also a lot of times could wipe out plant life. But ferns are still here today, as we can see behind me. And it is pretty awe-inspiring actually to think about these plants and the fact they have such a long history. I mean, from the time really of the age of fish to the age of amphibians and reptiles and dinosaurs to mammals, this family of plants, the fern, have survived and existed. All I can say is just wow. Now, I don't want everybody to get choked up, but I found a sensitive fern. I'm really enjoying walking around and learning about these plants and learning a little bit about the history of these plants. Like, ferns have been around for almost 400 million years and palm trees for almost 100 million years. These are interesting facts that I had no idea. I am not a paleobotanist. I'm a geologist and I do paleontology, but paleobotany is something that is not one of my specialties or something I worked a lot on. And so this is really exciting and really fun for me to come here and do some research and share that all with you. All right, let's keep rolling through and see what else we can learn about these fossil plants or these prehistoric plants. Okay, I know I'm here to see the plants, but look, there's rocks. And this is sandstone. And what's neat about this sandstone is there are actually some crystals growing on the underside of these sandstones, probably from along a fault zone. And these are little quartz crystals that are growing on the bottom part. And one of the things we can see on the sandstone are some crossbeds. So, and these look a lot like they'd be from a ancient ocean deposit, especially because we have some limestone right next to it. And I'm going to make the educated guess that these are all probably from the same general area. And speaking of rocks, they actually have a nice display here on petrified wood. It talks a little bit about how petrified wood forms, and not just that, but petrified wood is actually the state stone of Texas, and specifically it's petrified palm wood. So petrified palms were pretty abundant here after the time of the dinosaurs, so somewhere between 40 and 50 million years ago. And we can take a look at some of the wood that they have here, which I'm really excited about. And it says these are examples from here in Texas. They're really nice trunks of petrified wood, and they have 4 nice examples here. Of this petrified wood. Now, coming from Texas, this could be a variety of things. It could be kind of like a cypress. It could be a palm wood, although these don't look exactly like a palm wood to me. But if somebody knows a little bit more about the petrified wood here at Mercer, please leave a comment down below. I would love to learn as well. One of the things that's really neat about petrified wood, if it's been preserved well like these pieces, is you can still see kind of the faint outline of the tree rings. Pretty spectacular. Oh, and look at this piece. Wow. Some small quartz crystals growing in there. This is a beautiful piece of petrified wood, and it still has its bark structure preserved as well. And you can see there's a whole group of ants that are made a home underneath this thing. There's the little ants. Hi, little ants. I really like that they included the petrified wood here. I do wish they had some examples and maybe some pictures or a billboard of what some of the petrified palms look like, the petrified fern look like. Of course, you're going to be able to see that on this video. However, it'd be nice if they had a display here for folks, because they call this a prehistoric garden. So it'd be nice to see what some of those things look like in the fossil record. Okay, I've come to a fork in the road. Do I go left or right? I think I'm going to work my way towards the left. And one of the reasons I want to come this way is because they have a pine. Now, pine trees also have been found in the fossil record, and there's some pretty amazing fossils of pine trees. This one is called a Norfolk Island pine. So the earliest known pines I could find evidence of was about 140 million years ago. So the end of the Jurassic, first part of the Cretaceous. So towards that last span of the dinosaurs. And for all my friends in the South, this is the magnolia, and the magnolia has been flowering for 100 million years. In fact, it's one of the oldest known flowering plants in the fossil record. Pretty fascinating. The first evidence of them in the fossil record is from about 100 million years ago. So again, they're during this time of the Cretaceous. And it was because of the flowering plants coming out in the Cretaceous. So some paleontologists have suggested that maybe allergies or hay fever could have helped lead to the demise of the dinosaurs. That being said, the magnolia tree, or the earliest fossil magnolia tree, is right around 100 million years ago, and dinosaurs didn't go extinct till 65 million years ago. So that's a 35 million year difference, and I imagine that time dinos figured out how to make Claritin. No, but it probably had enough time for dinosaurs to learn to adapt and to live with those flowering plants. So the idea of hay fever maybe leading to the demise of the dinosaurs seems less likely to me than other things. Of course, there's lots of evidence for the asteroid event. So I'm learning a ton here walking around with you all. Here's another cycad. Again, we learned that these have been around for a really long time. I'm going to zoom in here. There's a little coast redwood, a sequoia, that is starting to grow right there. Now, redwoods and sequoias, they're another family that has lived for a long time. In fact, they first popped on the scene about 200 million years ago during the time of the Jurassic, or during the Jurassic. And of course, there's lots of places we can find redwoods today along the coastal California into Oregon, but also in the fossil record, we can find them in a lot of places. Places like around Denver, there's a place called Florissant National Monument where you can go up and see the trunks of these old redwoods and sequoias that have been preserved because of a volcanic event. Pretty fascinating, and another great ad here in this prehistoric garden. Here are a whole bunch of ferns. There's a whole, literally little mini forest of ferns right around a bunch of palm trees. And even cooler is they're surrounding a ginkgo tree, and ginkgo trees have a really long history, and there's some also very early plant fossils. In fact, they actually put this nice sign here about how ancient the ginkgos were, and that they were around since before the time of the dinosaurs. These ginkgos, like the one they have here, first popped on the scene about 300 million years ago, similar to what we were talking about with the ferns. So again, one of the oldest recorded types of plants around, and they think they've been pretty unchanged since the time of the dinosaurs, which is really fascinating as well. And again, if there's anybody out there who has a lot more specialization in this area, knows a lot more than me, please comment down below and share with us all. I would love to learn. I'm sure everybody else listening would love to learn as well. We've seen so many what they call living fossils, or plants that have been found in the fossil record, the ancient fossil record, hundreds of millions of years ago, and we can still see examples of them alive today. Also fascinating to think about, just like we were talking about with the fern earlier, that these ginkgo trees have survived for so long through so many extinction events and so many changes in what's happened to our planet through time, and yet they still exist. Absolutely fascinating, and really, again, awe-inspiring to sit here and see one, and really excited that Mercer Arboretum actually has one here. Okay, I just got squirreled, or rocked in my case. Check this out. This is a beautiful frothy basalt, and it's actually pretty light. It's actually a pumice. I can move this whole thing. All those things looks like it would be tons or really heavy. It's actually really light. It's a big piece of pumice, and so it's a glassy volcanic flow. In fact, you can see some of the sheen and shine coming off of this because of its glassy nature. That's a nice example from here too. I wish they would say where it came from. I have no idea, but it's really neat to see an igneous rock here. So we saw a sandstone rock, some limestone, both sedimentary family, and now we've seen some pumice or something from the igneous family. So one of the reasons I like making these videos with you all is I learned something new. And today, just now, I decided to look up why do they have so many lilies here in this prehistoric garden. I never thought of lilies as being a prehistoric plant, right? Things like palms and ferns and the ginkgo all kind of make sense to me, but the lilies, I had no idea. Even the magnolia was new to me, but turns out the first lily was from about, the first record of a lily was from about 15 million years ago. So during the time of the Cretaceous again, talking about flowering plants, we talked about the magnolia over there. So it turns out that lilies were popping out during the time of the dinosaurs as well. But that does explain why they have a lily after lily after. You'll see lilies back in the background too. They have signs for them everywhere. Now, I'm here in November, so the lilies are not in bloom. However, I hope to come back here another time and share with you all what these flowers look like and what the Mercer Arboretum area looks like when everything's in full bloom in March time frame. Here is something called a kunti, which actually I think is a Seminole word for, and I think it was called kunti, and I can't remember the second one, but it had something to do with a white root or white bread. And kunti here is part of the sago palm family, which is another one of these families that have been around for hundreds of millions of years, and related, I believe, to the cycads. And they have another palm over here, just a little one starting to pop up. And we learned palms really, these kinds, certain types of palms, the palm family, some of them showed up about 100 million years ago or so. And behind the palm, they have some more of these ferns. So I think the idea of ferns as a prehistoric feature has been imprinted on my brain from the time I was very little, because I remember riding the railroad at Disneyland, and there's a part where you ride the railroad and you go through basically a land before time, and the opening scene of that comes into maybe the Carboniferous, which is before the time of the dinosaurs and even before the time of the sailfins, things like Dimetrodon. And they show these scenes with these big ferns and giant dragonflies, and then you go into the time of the sailfin creatures, things like in the Permian, the Dimetrodon. And again, I remember ferns being very prominent in all those scenes. So the idea of ferns being prehistoric makes a lot of sense to me, and it sounds like it makes a lot of sense from what I'm learning for them to be in this garden as well. So I've gone full circle around one of the loops. Now I'm back to the petrified wood, and I'm going to go ahead and move down this pathway, which is where I had to decide on that fork from the left to the right. Let's see what we see going down this direction. So here is what's known as a yew, and this is a Japanese yew, and the yew actually came on the scene about 200 million years ago, and they found lots of examples of these, I believe, in Germany in the fossil record. So yet another time of the dinosaur tree. And here's some more kuntis, and look, oh, there's a little baby lizard. Let's see if I can zoom in on that little baby lizard for you all. There's a little lizard on top of that, getting warm on top of a takarum. They actually have a really neat sign here talking about plants through the ages. And this is something I was hoping to see and maybe a little bit more prominent, but I found it underneath this tree. And it talks about plant through the ages and how all plants didn't evolve at the same time. First came the mosses, then the ferns. After ferns came what we call the gymnosperms. And the gymnosperms are things like pine trees, ginkgos, yews, cycads, and junipers. And they were the first plants to make seeds, but they did not make flowers or true fruits. Most recently, a group called angiosperms evolved. These are the plants that make flowers and fruits. Magnolias are considered one of the more ancient angiosperms, and they have evolved before bees even existed. Their flowers are designed to be pollinated by ancient beetles. Well, isn't that really cool? So talking about those three groups for the plants, right? The ferns and mosses, they definitely have ferns here within this garden. We've seen lots of examples of those. We've also seen the gymnosperms, things like the yews and the cycads and the pines. And then we've actually seen the angiosperms, the flowering plants, things like the magnolia being one of the earliest examples of a flowering plant. And one, I had no idea, predated bees. So for it to get pollinated, that means they had to attract things like beetles and other bugs for that pollination process. Fascinating. Again, I'm learning so much here on this episode with all of you. Let's keep exploring, see what else we can learn together. If you do come here and explore, be sure during the summer months, spring, fall as well, you watch out for snakes. I have seen a lot of copperheads here. I've probably seen about a dozen or so in all my trips here. I've seen one coral snake, and I've seen maybe cottonmouth. So be very careful when you're walking around here. Now, as I start walking this direction, I think I'm getting to the end of this portion of the prehistoric garden, and we're getting into more of just kind of the classic garden area. Now, that being said, I would argue that every plant we pretty much see has to be prehistoric. Some much older than others, like we learned, like the palm we see in the background and this palmetto and some of these ferns. But there's probably much younger plants as well that people, of course, like roses, have bred in different ways that are much more modern. I do like the end of this walkway leads to this water feature. Got this little waterfall here. I love that even in November we still have some of these plants flowering here. And actually, we're just talking about bees, and you can see there's bees pollinating these flowers right now. One thing that's interesting is it mentioned when we're talking about the magnolias, the idea that there are beetles that would pollinate the early magnolias and probably a lot of the early flowers before bees came around. So the question is, when did bees come around, and who's got a lot of that information? I guess it's something we can all look up and research together. And I'm probably going to butcher this name. This is the Asteraceae, part of the sunflower family, and sunflowers didn't come onto the scene until well after dinosaurs were extinct. They popped on the scene somewhere between 45 and 50 million years ago, or at least the ancestors for modern day sunflowers. And so maybe something like this is what those early sunflower ancestors would have looked like, but part of the sunflower family. Is this log a piece of petrified wood in the making? I'll check back with you in a couple millennia. Something else I'm learning just from a botanical point of view is the number of types of ferns and palms, and it makes sense that there's so many of them, but I guess I spend so much time thinking about rocks and not thinking about plants. But there's so many varieties, like this fishtail fern, which is really cool looking, or this cardboard palm, also really neat looking. Now, these palms, because they're part of the sago palm family, are a little different than the palms we were talking about before that were 100 million years old. The sago family goes way back hundreds of millions of years. So a plant we have a lot of here in Texas are oaks, and they do have an oak here in the garden. And turns out the first oaks came from about 50 million years ago, and the earliest fossils were found in Patagonia in Argentina. So this would have been after the time of the dinosaurs that oaks came onto the scene. And here is a giant elephant ear, and it turns out the elephant ears evolved or showed up on the fossil record in the early Cretaceous. And look at the size of those elephant ears. I don't know if you can see, those are probably a meter long or about 3 feet long or so, each of those leaves. Absolutely gigantic. So here's a sweet gum, and it turns out the sweet gums are from after the time of the dinosaurs, and actually their fossils were found, or their oldest fossils were found in Greenland, which I don't know how often I've heard that Greenland is somewhere you find old fossils, but it turns out the oldest sweet gum fossils were found there from about 55 million years ago. Pretty interesting. So the cypress tree first came onto the scene in the Triassic, or at least the earliest fossils are from the time of the Triassic. So you can think of the Triassic as like the Chinle Formation or the Petrified Forest Formation. People are pretty familiar with petrified forest trees because there's a Petrified Forest National Monument, but these would have been living during that time, and I wonder if some of these could be, some of these cypress trees could be what make up part of the Petrified Forest National Park. So I'm about to step off of the path, this nice gravel path, and step into the future as I leave this prehistoric garden. That was really interesting. I learned a ton, and what a great job they've done here at Mercer Arboretum. Now, what I want to do is show you a couple other places here in Mercer above and beyond just this garden, because if you come here to visit, it really is a phenomenal place to come. It's only about 30 minutes north of downtown Houston, and it's absolutely free. It's a great place for families to come learn about plants or just walk among nature. And again, they have some spectacular exhibits along the way, like some amazing sculptures as well as amazing photo ops through beautiful arches, through other beautiful garden areas. This kind of classical, I don't know, Greek or Roman fountains and architecture in here, which also has a little mini hedge maze over here. They have this little fairy garden and kids area. They have a garden area talking about farming and fruit. Right now it's winter time, so all the leafy greens are out, and it looks like they actually have some pretty nice looking peppers back there as well. And my favorite part of the gardens, aside from just the general aesthetic, is you can actually learn along the way, including learning about bees. And they actually have an active beehive sitting out in this grassy area here. So a number of those bees we saw within the prehistoric garden probably live within these beehives. They also have these amazing grounds you can walk around and just enjoy on a nice day. Walk these gravel paths, and eventually they're going to lead us to this amazing picturesque lake they call Story Lake. And walking around the lake is by far one of my favorite things to do in the fall, spring, and winter here. And it's somewhere you can see some of these prehistoric plants like this cypress with some stunning scenery around them, or that help make up some of the stunning scenery. With a view of my turtle friends on the log out there, and with the tea house behind me and the stunning scenery, including some modern examples or living fossils back here, the pine trees and the cypress. I want to thank you all for joining me today to come check out the prehistoric garden here at Mercer Arboretum. I learned a ton today. I hope you did as well. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Please leave comments down below. I love hearing your thoughts. Also, if you'd like me to do a more complete video on Mercer Arboretum itself and walk around and look at some of the flowers, look at some of the other scenery here, I'm planning on doing something like that in the March time frame, so when everything's in full bloom here. If you have interest in that, please let me know in the comments down below. I'm thinking about doing the video and I want to know what you all think about that. Okay, with that being said, thank you all for joining me again. We'll see you all in the next adventure, and take care.